So this is going to be a quick summary and then a quick look at some of the industrial papers around this topic from other companies as well. So yeah, we've talked about stakeholders' objectives. We've talked about methods for multi-objective modeling. We talked about how we can leverage user, supplier, and content understanding to benefit these ML models. And now we're going to talk about industrial applications. So let's quickly look at some of these. So one is recommendation with capacity constraints. So somebody 5 minutes ago asked whether these prediction models should only be about user predictions. No, I mean, we have capacity constraints. Like oftentimes suppliers won't have capacity. So we have to understand that and then surface recommendations accordingly. So this is a nice paper from CIKM 2017 from Constantina. I think she's now at Google Research, wherein like they pose the problem that items often have capacity constraints. So how do we deal with that? So essentially what they do is, again, they have a weighted mixture of objectives. So there's a loss which captures the quality of recommendations. That's a typical recommendation loss. And there is a capacity loss as well. So capacity loss, so capacity is really like things going out of stock. And I mean, oftentimes there's a delay in which things go out of stock and then you report it on your platform. So we want to make sure that the platform is aware of these things and incorporates that. So essentially here, again, we can compute the average capacity loss as like what's the expected usage and is my capacity less than that? But indicator functions are not suitable for optimization. So what they do is like they use the logistic loss of the difference as a surrogate. But more importantly, they viewed this problem in a two objective world. That I have my typical loss, which captures the quality of recommendations, and then I have a capacity loss. And the capacity loss is coming in from the logistic because we cannot work with the indicator functions in a nice principled manner. So again, one of the, again, simple problem around, we care about the user, but we also care about supplier capacity. Another paper from LinkedIn around email volume optimization. So again, like if you send less emails, then there's a drop in engagement. If you send more emails, the user ignores and there's a drop in brand value. So this paper is a KDD 2016 paper. And this is a nice example of user metric and a platform metric. So you want users to be engaged with your platform. So you want, it's not a supplier problem, it's more of a platform-centric objective. So again, the trade-offs are you want to minimize the number of emails you send, you want to maximize the downstream sessions, you want to minimize the resulting complaints. So here, quickly going through, like, I think Dima mentioned this in a question on the chat that should we care about like constraint optimization as a solution? So yeah, this paper talks about that. So you want to minimize the number of emails sent, so that's your global objective. And then you have targets for local and global session counts. You have global and local tolerance for complaints. So I like this paper because it's very neat to differentiate between these three, but also they're also talking about tolerance aspect here. So not all users are okay with it. They're not receptive. So I think this is another supporting point to the user receptivity work that we have to understand, like tolerance for complaints as well. And they formulated the problem as a constraint LP problem and then solve it. Click shaping at Yahoo. This is one of those very nice KDD 2011 work. I'm sure a lot of you would have looked at it. If not, highly recommend you to read this paper. It talks about click shaping to optimize multiple goals. I've stolen this slide from their ICML tutorial by Deepak Agarwal and Bichung. So again, let's consider two articles here. So article 1 has a CTR of 5%, but the utility per click is 5. Article 2 has a CTR of 4.9%, but it has a higher utility per click. So if we promote article 2, then we lose 1 click every 100 visits, but we still gain 5 utilities points, right? So if we do it for a large number of visits, then there's a trade-off. So essentially, like you might lose on 5% relative CTR, but then you gain overall 40% in utility. So again, nice paper talking about these like trade-offs, but more importantly, this talks about a global optimization routine, which is not really that common in a bunch of other recent papers. There's a very recent paper at SIGIR 2020 coming in from the Facebook marketplace team on seller-side A/B testing. So far we've talked about modeling, performance improvements, but not like A/B test and evaluation, right? So this paper presents a kind of actual framework for seller-side A/B testing on marketplaces. So again, not going into details, but then so far our thinking around evaluation and A/B testing has been, okay, how do I divide my users into randomized groups of A and B so that I can make some meaningful claims from my metrics, right? But then in marketplaces, you not only care about users, but you also have to think about like how does supplier interaction and supply things happen around like you're deciding on which users are exposed to A versus B. So I think it's a very nice paper, and I think this is a nice line of research which will start from some of this work around supply side A/B testing on marketplaces as well. Nice paper from LinkedIn on content creation. So here, this is a paper which talks about how can we incentivize people to create content on the platform. So a KDD 2019 paper from last year looking at feedback shaping, that if we show more content to users, they're going to get more feedback, they're going to get incentives to create more content on the platform. So TikTok does amazingly well at getting people to create more content, right? So their recommendation systems are kind of thinking around these lines as well. Some work at Etsy, joint optimization of profit and relevance. The paper literally says exactly what it does. They're trying to understand user relevance and the profit in terms of the products and platform it's on Etsy. So Etsy is a nice platform. We covered that in our case study discussion on part 2 of the tutorial as well. So this is a nice paper around on that topic. On Airbnb search, there's a very nice case study, which is a recent paper, which is kind of a preprint on revenue maximization via Airbnb search. So in this paper, look, I mean, so the problem is here on Airbnb, when users are buying an item, of course, they search for it, right? And you can look at like query relevance models, but also some items are competing with each other. And there you can make a decision based on some revenue guided principles. So this revenue need not be for the platform, but it could be for the user, or it could be for the host as well. So a nice paper, which is a preprint from Airbnb on this topic. I talked about this paper, just re-mentioning it, joint optimization of music streaming. So this is a paper we have at KDD this year. We're going to talk about it in the upcoming week, wherein we consider multiple stakeholders, multiple objectives, and then use a contextual bandit model, the multi-objective version I described before. There are a bunch of other applications, like a bunch of other papers on this. Definitely a lot of work which I have not included and this tutorial does not cover. So if you're aware of some of those, then please feel free to point it out, mention them, and I'm going to add it to the references. So with that said, we have the final 13 minutes. I'm going to use 3 of those minutes to talk about the take-home messages, which I think I've iterated at least 4 times. So I'm hoping by now everybody would be familiar with these. So the traditional recommendation systems community has been majorly user-centric and intentionally so. So we have kind of motivated the need to explicitly consider other stakeholders. We have looked at like different types of objectives. We have looked at different types of marketplaces, and we have motivated the need for 2 things. One is use multi-objective models, and the other one is leverage insights from user content and supplier understanding. Next, we have looked at optimization objectives. So we looked at like 7 case studies, and for each of those case studies, we looked at what the stakeholders could be and what the objectives could be for each stakeholder. And then we have looked at like some interplay between those objectives as well. And again, the takeaway point being that we should carefully consider what kind of objectives we decide on some of those. We've then looked at methods for multi-objective recommendation. Like we looked at some flavors of approaches, multitask learning, scalarization, multi-objective multitask, bandit-based and RL-based solutions. And again, like we've pitched the point that it need not be a zero-sum game. We can make gains without hurting some of your other stakeholder metrics as well. And we have also talked about one of the most important things, which is around like how do we leverage insights about users, insights about suppliers, insights about content in order to enrich the main system to do a good job at recommending content. So that's it. So we had a 3.5 hour long tutorial. I hope you guys enjoyed it. And again, like if you're not taking away anything, just take away our Twitter handles because we would love for you to reach out on Twitter or even like emails. to talk about this. And yep, thank you. I would love for us to kind of, again, unmute yourself, pose out questions, or anything, any learnings, anything which we might have missed. I have a few questions which I'm going to start talking about now. To what extent, for people in academia, public data sets. So this is, yeah, so this is excellent because Spotify has invested a lot in public data sets. We have 1 million track sessions data set, wherein we have, this is coming in from Rex's in 2017, I think. And that paper, that data set is 1 million tracks and 1 million playlists essentially. So that's the set style problems you can solve from that data set. There's another data set on 1 million sessions I mentioned, which is the Wisdom 2019 Cup challenge, wherein we have 1 million sessions and user interactions on those sessions. We recently have released a Trek data set on podcast. So that's like 100,000 podcasts with transcripts for a lot of like content understanding style data sets. So yeah, we've invested. I'm proud of the fact that like Spotify has invested amazingly nicely in releasing these public data sets. There's a lot of internal battle with legal people, PR people around these things, but we've kind of come out victorious. So that's one thing. Would you upload the slides? Yes. So the slides should be there within 20 minutes of this tutorial. I'll end the tutorial, go and have water, and then come back and upload the slides. What about settings? So Hannah has a question. What about settings where it's not practical to predict multiple outcomes? Is it feasible to try to include multiple objectives into NDCG and sample weights? Yes, that's a very good point. Look, if you don't care about multiple objectives, or if you don't have them, then we can modify NDCG, right? I mean, the hackiest way to do that is NDCG uses relevance. So now the relevance could be a multi-objective relevance. So I mean, we talked about the reward. We talked about playing around with the reward function. That the reward function could be a combination of multiple rewards. You can do the same with relevance there as well. Or we tried some recent tests and some nice learnings around using. So we did some tests around using ranking, like single objective ranking, but then giving more weights to some of your examples which are coming in from other stakeholders. So assume that you have a single objective ranker trained. And for that ranker, what if I upweigh some examples and downweigh some others? So if my upweigh decision is based on some of my stakeholders, then that's another hacky and like a hacky way to incorporate some of your other stakeholder information in your training. So you're still training a single objective ranker, but now because you've upweighed the losses from that, you're kind of giving differential weight to the training examples. So then you can encode that, hey, you don't do bad on these examples because these examples encode something from my other stakeholders. So there are hacks which we can use around there. There's a question from Shiran. Are predictive models trained in separate steps and multi-objective, or sometimes they're treated as end-to-end? Yeah, so I think like right now, most of the work I've seen are like separate, that you, again, the way I imagine is like you have a global central orchestrator, which is trying to orchestrate the global optimization problems across stakeholders. And it is supported by multiple prediction models. So the content understanding, user understanding, prediction models, these are all individual supporting elements which will help the global orchestrator make the right decisions. So I mean, I'm all in favor of disentangling the two process. Again, like people love end-to-end systems. So in that, if you like end-to-end systems, then you might want to tie these up. But then I would really want to kind of disentangle them and have a system which is supported by multiple components. And it also helps, this modularity helps in production, because it becomes like too much cumbersome for one team to manage a monolithic system which does everything. Rather, I would kind of disentangle responsibilities and give a team the ownership of one model, do your best job for that model, and then I'm going to use this to make my decisions. User receptivity, right? I don't want user receptivity to be the same model as my multi-objective model. I mean, I want somebody to do a really nice job at user receptivity, and then we can use those inputs to do this multi-objective orchestration centrally. Thank you for the good feedback. I'm going to take screenshots of these for memory. There's a question from Valid around, is it better to model user attributes as Boolean or continuous? How about stationary context? Yes, I look, I mean, no reason why we should stop at binary, right? I mean, even in the generalist specialist, we had a score going from 0 to 1. I mean, I think we are doing injustice to the users if we say that, hey, there are only two types of users, like 0 and 1. So I mean, continuous scores are more informative, and we have seen that. If you look at the recent receptivity paper, there we are talking about user receptivity as they're receptive or not receptive. But I think that's the drawback of that paper, but not and not a good choice. So I mean, internally as well, like we should be thinking about user receptivity as well in terms of a continuous spectrum, that some users are more, and even like contextual receptivity. That there's a trade of users that you're receptive overall, but then like a lot depends on context as well. So then like, again, like if we are sophisticated enough, we could add that context information in terms of understanding how receptive a user is in this current context. Mohit has a very nice point and a good question around how about introduction of fairness in multi-stakeholders to avoid situations like one-sided monopoly. This is, yeah, I think this is a bit beyond the scope of the present work. So there is a lot of nice work going on in the fairness community, which is starting to get married with the multi-stakeholder community as well. So Etsy's group, Alex Butel and others have some nice fairness papers. Robin Burke in the US, he has a good academic lab set up around evaluating fairness and popularity bias specifically. So some nice PhD students doing some work around there, including Himan. He was an intern at Spotify recently this summer. So yeah, I think like we should definitely include fairness. The problem is, what is fairness? I mean, even though in the paper in Sikkim, we use that term in the paper title, but then like literally we were talking about diversity and supplier diversity as a proxy for fairness. So do you want to be fair to all retailers? Like some retailer might have 100 products, some retailers only have 10 products. Some retailers have been on Amazon for 10 years. Another retailer has been on the platform for like 10 days. So how much do you control for all of these things? So, I mean, defining fairness is an inherently hard problem. And we've, again, like not a lot of work has gone into defining fairness for platforms as well. So I think this is a very, very hot and very non-trivial challenge for people to consider. There's a question from Harsh. Do you consider different number of arms for different context vectors in multi-objective? So for now in this work, again, it's an engineering solution that we have. Like we've just done a fixed number of arms across different users, but I think it does make sense in this. I think Harsh, you're onto something good in the sense that why should I have a static number of arms? Even this is related to the point we discussed around exploration, that we should explore more in a marketplace setting, in a multi-stakeholder setting. So I think like, why should we just stop at exploring more? We should also question like if we can play around with the arm size. The only problem is like the math doesn't play out as nicely as you would want. So we had an intern, Nian, who did a lot of head scratching, and it was hard for us to get like some sensible bounds on our contextual bandit model solution. So if you care about some of the theoretical properties, then changing some of these things are not going to play out nicely for you. Whereas like the typical fixed arm style things are easier mathematically to work with. There's a question from Samir on what do you think about interpretability in marketplace? As you combine objectives, the explainability task becomes harder. That's very, very, very true. In fact, we have an intern in Stockholm this summer looking at explanations and interpretability in a search ranking scenario. But yes, I think like it becomes harder, but so interpretability and attribution, like if you want to attribute like, okay, why am I seeing this track? Is it because of my user-centric objectives or some other objectives? So these are all important problems. And I don't think like the community has touched upon enough on this topic. We have one last minute. So a couple of quick last questions with respect to those firms that failed. Could they have done differently? Sorry, I'm not sure I understand what firms I mentioned that failed. They have done differently.
Yeah, it was that list. I think it was like the ones with all the news articles.
Right.
Yeah, because I was thinking like, you know, like this approach is good for like maintaining a system, but like that's kind of like building a system. Like once you have a system and it hits critical mass, then this type of approach, it's like it's a way to maintain that system, but then, you know, isn't more of a function of just not having enough critical mass versus having a good system to actually maintain these relationships.
So what relationships are you talking about? Like the cross stakeholder relationships, or?
Yeah, like
Yes,
optimizing for too much
right,
user engagement versus the
right.
suppliers.
Yes. I think this is a problem, not entirely. Okay, this is not the headache of. Okay, this is not entirely the headache of the ML models powering systems, but this is an inherent problem of the platform itself. Right? I mean, I can create a platform, and if no supplier is there, then when the consumers come in, they won't see anything. And if I create a platform which has multiple suppliers, but then if nobody uses it, then the suppliers are futile over there. So I think platforms inherently suffer from this problem. And now when we add the multi-objective ML formulation on top of it, then it just kind of increases that problem multifolds. That in general, yeah, I mean, in when we have, again, I do think we haven't done any experiments, and I don't have any insights on how much of a minimum handshaking we need from the user and supplier perspective in order to make these things function well. But that's a very good point, that one of the evaluation criteria could be how early can you use some of these models? Do you have to have a holistic, well-functioning, healthy platform already in order to use these things, or can you start deploying these models right at the start, like when users are just discovering? And very importantly, like when users are discovering, I think the bandit style solutions will play a good role, because I mean, the bandits assume that I don't know enough about the user, so I'm going to try this exploitation framework. So then, like, everything is a discovery when the first time the user comes on your platform, right? And there's no familiarity, there's nothing which we can bank upon. So I think that's a very, very good point, that we should think about how early we could deploy some of these systems, and what role it plays based on like the current platform ecosystem. Perfect. Yeah, that's a very, very good point. So yeah, I mean, I think like as you could see, like these are very, very important topics. And one of the reasons why Ben and I decided to do this tutorial early on was that we need more research on this, and this is a very important topic because a lot of companies are becoming platforms essentially. So yeah, I mean, so these are the topics which we are interested in. There's a paper from YouTube, the mixture of experts, which is a multitask model, which yes, I should have. I think we included that in the Rex's version, but somehow it got messed up in some of the slide transitions. But yeah, definitely, lovely paper by on what you should watch next. That's the Rex's 2019 paper from Google folks on like multitask mixture